Hi, Anna again, 6th year Home Economics. Today we're looking at a small section called Family Resource Management, or FRM for short. This is really looking at how families organise themselves, how they make decisions and how they implement plans of action. Honestly, it's something most of us do in our heads. We don't actually write it down, but I'm going to take you through the process and why we are using it here in Family Resource Management. So it's really about families using resources to achieve a goal. And resources are human resources and they're material resources. So I'm going to give you a very simple example. If we want to bake a cake, our human resources are skill, time, nutritional knowledge maybe. Our material resources, we need ingredients, we need an oven, and we need utensils to bake our cake. So what's the purpose of family resource management? Well, its purpose really is to make families to use resources wisely, efficiently, and to avoid waste. And the waste is also, human resource of wasting our time, taking too long to do something, not doing it efficiently, but also not wasting material resources like food, for example. So there are two types of family resource management. There's what we call an open system. The open system is the one that we're familiar with in our families, where the families use outside agencies and resources to help them achieve their goals. So for example, we use a school to educate our children, we use a college for them to get third level education, we use a hospital for our health care, and we go to work to earn money. A closed system does not use these outside agencies, and the best example of a closed system would be the Amish community in America, where they very much try to live as if it was 100 years ago. They're very self-sufficient, they grow their own food, they educate their own children, and they don't use some of the outside systems that I mentioned. So why do we use family resource management? We use it to try and make day-to-day family activities efficient, be that food shopping, be it organising the family home, be it meal planning, shopping, etc. So I've given you some examples here of the family as a management unit. We use it to manage our money. So we use it for short-term money management, things like, paying our utility bills, our food shopping, our transport. And then we use it for more long-term money management, saving for our children to go to college, saving for a family holiday, change the car, buy a house. They would be some of our long-term goals. We use it in meal planning, and again, we do this in our head. We quite often don't write it down. You're using your nutritional knowledge to plan nutritious meals for your family. You're making decisions about what you're going to cook and feed them, and based on that you'll make a shopping list. You might actually write that down, and then you will cook your meals. We use it when we're thinking about childcare and how families with children manage life. So we've spent extensive time talking about the cost of childcare when we were looking at our social studies, a huge cost for very many families. Where do they send their children to school? Are they going to take advantage of the free education system, fee paying, and so on? And the safety and hygiene of particularly where they will choose to send their children to childcare. But we also use this family resource management system in conflict resolution. And this is something we talked about in social studies as well, where we talked about, conflicts will always arise in families. How do you overcome conflict? Well, talking, we're all really good at that. What we're not very good at is listening and hearing what the other person has to say. and inevitably it involves compromise to resolve a difficulty. Okay, so the next step in looking at family resource management is the steps involved in decision making. This is quite a popular question. I advise you to learn these steps really well. So the first step is to identify a decision to be made. So you're identifying your goal here. And like I mentioned, if we're going to bake a cake, our goal is to bake a cake. So then we have to explore solutions, and under family resource management you're required to explore at least 2 solutions. So in our cake example, that could be looking up a cookery book, deciding are we going to make chocolate cake, lemon cake, orange cream cake. So we have to explore at least 2. And then you examine the consequences of each solution. Well, Johnny's favourite is chocolate cake, but I'm baking the cake and my favourite is lemon, or whatever the criteria for your decision is. So then you choose a solution, so we'll choose chocolate cake. We make a plan, so we figure out have we got all the ingredients, what time are we going to bake the cake at, preheat our oven, get out all our utensils, have time to cool it before we ice it, so you actually physically write out a plan. If you're baking the cake, you're mentally doing this. So action, bake our cake, carry out our plan, and then evaluate the outcome. Did everybody like it? Was it baked for a special occasion? Did the person for whom it was baked like it? Did we cool it for long enough before icing it, or did the icing melt? So you're asking yourself questions in your head about how you think it turned out. So we need to go through, for the purposes of family resource management, 3 steps that are involved in decision making and planning. And I apologise, this is a little bit American in how it's done, but this is how we have to do it. So what we're looking at are what are called the components of management. And there are 3 components. The first stage is called inputs. And under inputs comes 2 things, our demands. And our demands are our needs, our wants, and basically identifying our goal based on our needs and wants. Then we look at our resources. And remember, resources are things you need to achieve a goal. So our resources are human, our skill, our time, our knowledge, and material. And so material could be money, it could be equipment, it could be ingredients. Okay, so the second stage is throughputs. And throughputs has 3 stages. It has planning, so planning involves some of the steps we looked at in decision making. So identifying a goal, researching our alternatives, remember, at least 2 alternatives are required. Consider the consequences. Make a decision. And identify the resources you need. The second step in throughputs is organising. So organising involves allocating tasks. So for example, to go back to our cake making our cake again. You could have your children helping you or your brothers and sisters. So you might say, well, Mary will weigh out the ingredients, Johnny will get out the mixer and mix the mixture. That's allocating tasks. And under organising, we make a time plan. The time plan is very similar to what you would have done for your Junior Cert Home Economics practical, where you were required to write out a time plan. And the third stage is implementation. So that's action, carry out your plan. And then our final stage is what's called outputs. And this is our evaluation. So when you're evaluating, you're asking, the first question you ask yourself is, did I meet my goal? So did you meet your goal? Were all resources used efficiently? Was the time plan efficient? And would you make any changes if you were to do this again? So you have in your handout a concrete learning template that shows you the stages in a graphic organizer style. And what we're going to do now, again, like we did with the last topic, is to do a worked example. So the worked example I've taken from a 2013 exam question, where it asks you to use the components of management to plan a school graduation. So when we're planning the school graduation, so our inputs, and what they were looking for in this question was 3 points at 2 marks each. So the first stage is going to be our demands. And then we need to come up with 3 points under demands. So point 1 would be our needs. Point 2 would be our goal. Point 3 would be our values. And just to give you a 4th point, if you wanted to choose a different 3 points, our 4th one could be resources. So in the case of our school graduation, what are our needs? Well, we want the students, their parents and staff probably to mark and celebrate the end of their time at second level schools. So your needs are going to be that the school students, staff and parents celebrate or mark the end of second level schooling. So, what's your goal here? It's to mark the leaving of second level in a meaningful manner. And I'm keeping these points deliberately short. This is section A of a 3-part question, so you're going to have to be tight on time. And in total it's 20 marks. Okay, so what are our values? Well, that will depend on the school ethos. Is your school a Catholic school? Is it an educate together school? Is it a multi-denominational school? And you will decide whether there's going to be a religious basis based on the ethos of the school. And your resources, again, that will depend on what the student body want. You know, so your resources, if it's going to be, if it's a Catholic school, it might be to have it in a church. One of your resources might be you need to get a priest on board. If it's a non-denominational school, you might decide to have it in the school. Are you going to do catering? Who's going to pay for that? So there could be costs involved there. Okay, so our throughputs, and again, they're looking for 3 points at 2 marks here. So first of all, we're going to do the planning stage. So, in the case of school graduation, that might involve setting up a committee. The committee will research options. At least 2, like I said to you before, in the decision making. They might look at, you know, a venue. Is it going to be a neutral venue outside of the school? Is it, if there's a religious bias, will it be in a church? Will it be in the actual school itself? And so they need to consider alternatives. So, the second part of our throughputs, remember we had 3 headings under throughputs, is our organising. So organising is going to be our second heading here. So the organising will involve allocating tasks to various students. And the tasks could be things like allocating different people to research options, getting people to contact catering companies, price finger food if that's what you decide to do. Are you going to print any material for the parents? You know, is there going to be music? Maybe you'd like to include the songs in the music. Maybe you'd like a class photo. So again, allocating tasks according to what you have decided in your researching your options. And they need to have regular committee meetings. And our final stage in throughputs is implementing. So we are going to have our graduation. So book a venue if that's required, collect money if that's required, and action, have the graduation. This brings us over to the last bit, our outputs and evaluating. And the reflection and evaluation involves, you know, assessing the result, was the goal achieved? So in other words, did you feel you marked it as you set out in your goal? You know, that we mark the end of second level in a meaningful manner. And you will know that from the feedback you will get from other students. Did you feel your resources were used efficiently? And the most important bit is, would you make any change? And for a graduation, that might involve advising this year's fifth years, you know, when you're planning this next year, we made a mistake at whatever stage you feel you made the mistake, and you're advising them not to make those mistakes. Okay, so the other part of that question the factors that affect families in making choices. So the factors that affect families' decision making, particularly when it comes to the planning issues we've looked at with families, are first of all, the first one is the composition of the family. And you'll see on page 1 of your notes for this that we have the factors for families making decisions like this. And sorry, I've lost my page here now. So what the composition of the family refers to, how many are in the family, so the number of people in the family, the age, because young children are very expensive, you have to pay for childcare, teenagers can be equally expensive, needs of their education add up, then college students if they're still living at home. Older family members brings us on to the second point with the life cycle of the family. And looking at the priorities, older people who might be retired, maybe they're living on a pension. We would have talked when we talked about money management, about those who have occupational pensions and those that don't. People relying on the state pension in the life cycle of the family are going to have to be very careful with money. Others who've made good provision may be better off economically. Third point is looking at employment patterns. So, are both parents working? If so, the chances are there's a fairly good income and, you know, their priorities might be a little bit different. People with less money coming in have to make very careful choices. Employment patterns also refers to the hours people work. Are they regular 9-to-5 workers? Are they shift workers? Do they work weekends? And the impact that has on family life. And on basic things we talked about at the very beginning, like who does the shopping, who does the organising, the laundry. A lot of that is affected by employment patterns. Our fourth point here is on socioeconomic groups. And this overlaps the point we just mentioned about employment patterns. It's to do with income. Those with higher incomes in a higher socioeconomic group, their decisions probably aren't as crucial. I mean, they still have to make decisions, but those on very tight budgets have very difficult decisions to make and have to be very careful in planning their spending. We're looking for, the next point is about culture. Our culture accepts very readily dual income families, but we have cultures where it's frowned on for women to work, and that's going to have an effect on the decisions made by those families. And our final point is on gender roles. We talked a lot in social studies about gender roles. Are chores shared equally? If not, does that lead to conflict? That conflict resolution, we talked about role overload. In general, it seems to be women suffering from role overload. So this brings us to the values of the family. Are gender roles equal? If they are equal, is everybody pulling their weight? And coming back to the life cycle of the family, a point that can be made here is that as children get older and become teenagers, become young adults, more should be expected of them in terms of the running of the family and the family resource management. So our last bit really is to look at some of the types of family decisions that can be made or that need to be made, and ones that you could work out in a working example like I've done with the graduation. So I'm going to put a list of those on the board for you to think about. So they include things like meal planning, one that came up a couple of years ago was about a family having unexpected guests. and they were thrown into a bit of a panic because the house was filthy, there was no shopping in, and so you would be asked to work out the working example using the inputs, throughputs and outputs and the headings that I gave you under those. Money management, there are several examples you could give on money management. Another one that you could work out is daily activities. So, Dad goes to work at 7 a.m, Mum goes at 8:30, Johnny has football at 4, Mary has hockey at 7. How do the family work that out under the headings that I've outlined? So that completes resource management. Make sure that you learn the steps in the decision-making process. You practice doing some worked examples under the headings inputs, outputs, throughputs, and that you learn the factors that influence families' decision making.